You know, normally when you refer to Israel, it's referred to as Dan to Beersheba, from the north to the south. And we have been all over the place here. We are working our way now from here at the Dead Sea to go over to Tel Arad, which will be here, and we'll look at some ancient sites. Now, when I say ancient sites, probably the youngest, the earliest site that we'll look at tonight will be anywhere from 1000 to 3000 BC. So we're going back some distance in time. Some of the oldest places that we've had an opportunity to visit. It's kind of interesting. This was day 7 for our trip. Am I coming through okay, or? How about now? Now it is? Okay. I had turned it on and forgot it, and I turned it back off. So, day 7 of our trip, and it just happens to be the Sabbath. What do you think happens on the Sabbath in Israel? Yeah, it depends on who you are, I guess. There are doors and elevators in the hotel that are for use on the Sabbath. The other ones are non-functional. They don't want you pressing any buttons. They don't want you reaching and grabbing the door and having to pull it open. Everything is automatic. The elevators there, for most of us, they drive you crazy because how they get around in their elevators, they have one elevator that stops at every floor. You don't mash any buttons, it just stops at every floor. So you've got people getting on and getting off all day long on every floor. So it's a little bit different. The banks are closed. Most stores and businesses, public transportation is shut down. Kosher restaurants are shut down. And again, we have the special doors and elevators to be used. We leave the Dead Sea area and go by close to an area that's referred to as Sodom and Gomorrah. Of course, there's really no way of knowing exactly where it is, because what did God say He was going to do with Sodom and Gomorrah? What was He going to turn it into? Yeah, ashes. You know, so anybody that's claiming to be the location of Sodom and Gomorrah and have buildings, they're not keeping up with the Bible. We're going to be heading west into the Judean desert. We're going to see more sheep and goats and camels. 68% of Israel is desert. In this area that we're going to down at the bottom is referred to as Negev, N-E-G-E-V. First stop we're going to have is at Tel Arad. What is it called? Tel. What does Tel mean? It's a hill. It's built. It's layers. It's one group of people building on top. One civilization built on top of another civilization. And of course, there are many pictures that we could go through, but we're gonna we've got it narrowed down to about, I think, 30 some odd pictures tonight. But the main thrust of the lesson tonight is, if you do what God says, things go well. If you don't do what God says, now, and I'm not talking about, we'll see here, I'm not talking about turning 180 degrees from God. I'm just talking about, well, I think I can do it this way and God will be okay with it. We'll see quickly tonight in God developing this relationship with man that He's in the middle of here, that when He tells them how He wants something done, He means it, and He wants it done that way. Tellerrod is a high bowl surrounded by green. As we look at some of these pictures, I want you to see what's in the background, because there's a lot of orchards and vineyards all the way around this in the desert. So if you have water, we know that it's a very rich soil. It's about 14 miles west of this Dead Sea area that we were talking about here. This is a fortress for Judah for 300 years, from Solomon to Josiah. Canaanite city, 2600 BC on the lower level, and we'll look at that. Let's see, I think we can get it. No, it's not in that one. Before I move on, notice here that they did have a palace and did have a temple. This is what? It's an altar. And we'll look at some scripture here in a little bit where God gave specific instructions on how He wanted this altar built. And these things are 5 foot by 5 foot by 3 foot tall, and He wanted it built out of uncut stone. Here we can see some of the ruins on the corner, and this is the old city here. Arad, A-R-O-D, and of course this hill was built. It was built up the last time by Israel, and it was a fortress. It was up high enough, a double gate entrance with towers on both sides of the gates, and then this lower part was the city, the living area. Water from the mountains worked its way down this way, and I'll have a picture in a moment that'll show you how they captured water in cisterns at the base of this mound, and then physically carried water up to the cisterns that were on top. So they had water, all the water they needed during their while they were fortified. Turn to Deuteronomy chapter 12. And I'm going to read verses 29, 30, and 31. Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 29 says, "When the Lord your God cuts off before you the nations whom you go into disposes, and you dispossess them and dwell in their land, take care that you do not ensnare to follow them after they have been destroyed before you, and that you do not inquire about their gods, saying, how did these nations serve their gods, that I also may do the same? You shall not worship the Lord your God in that way, for every abominable thing that the Lord hates they have done for their gods, for they even burn their sons and their daughters in the fire to their gods." So explicit instructions about when you go in. Actually, we'll read here in a moment, God tells them, go in and destroy everything. Get rid of it all. People and all. Again, you can see part of the old city, and then you can see orchards here, and in the background you can see the white areas. That's the shades that are built over the vineyards, grapes. Numbers chapter 21. Numbers chapter 21. It gets us started. The Canaanites that were in possession of this land here, that the Israelites are coming. So they go out to meet them and attack them when they cross the Jordan River. And they capture some of them. But the rest that get away, they go to God in Numbers chapter 33. Numbers chapter 33. Verse 40 says, the Canaanite, the king of Arad, who lived in Negeb in the land of Canaan, heard at the coming of the people of Israel. And you drop down to verse 51. In the middle there it says, when you pass over the Jordan into the land of Canaan, then you shall drive out all the inhabitants of the land from before you and destroy all their future figured stones and destroy all their metal images and demolish all their high places. Then you go up to verse 55. It says, but if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then those of them whom you let remain shall be as barbs in your eyes and thorns in your sides, and they shall trouble you in the land where you dwell. 56 says, and I will do to you as I thought to do to them. So very explicit directions. And then we look up, and here, this is where Josiah comes into the picture. Josiah is one of the kings of the southern, southern kingdom. Josiah was a good king. Josiah was 8 years old when he became king, and we can look at 2 Kings 22 verses 8 through 11. Tells about Josiah. Second Kings 23 verses 1 through 3, and then verse 25. Josiah went in and removed all of the pagan items. This is going down into a cistern there that's up on top. This is their Holy of Holies here. If you'll look, of course, they've got a pedestal on both sides, one taller than the other where they burned incense, but in the back, what do you see there? Standing stone. Okay, and we've got some pictures that we acquired while we were over there. There's also a standing stone right behind us. So they were splitting, worshiping Yahweh was over here on this side. And let me see if I can see the name of the Asherah. I think that's correct. I can't put my eyes on it right now, but yes, Asherah. He was on the left. So when we read in Deuteronomy chapter 12, verses 29 through 31, it's what God was talking about. Don't worship their gods. Don't do like they do. But yet, guess what they found when they started digging here and excavating? They found both of those standing stones. They had just been buried. So they didn't do what God told them to do. They deviated from it. He said destroy it. They covered it up. Not that I couldn't, I wouldn't know if they ever used it or not, but they did not follow God's directions. Josiah was a good king, and he reigned for 31 years. His father, and he had 2 sons that came after him. They were bad kings. So, all of the lessons that you can glean from these 3-4 places that we're going to go tonight. There's many of them, but here's one. Josiah led a good life, was a good king. And he did all he could do, I'm sure, to raise his sons to be good people too. But he didn't get it done. They wound up not being good people. And the same thing can happen to us today too. The big dispute in all three of the places, tales that we're going to look at is going to be dealing with altars. You know, we've mentioned the four-horned altar, and we'll have a picture of that four-horned altar again here in just a little bit when we get to Beersheba. Why is that altar not what God wanted? He specifically said that he wanted that altar in Exodus 20, 24. Exodus 20, 24. In Exodus 20, 24, this is a law about altars. It says, an altar of earth you shall make for me, and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen, in every place where I cause my name to be remembered. I will come to you and bless you. If you make me an altar of stone, you shall not build it of hewn stone, for if you wield your tool on it, you profane it. Okay? And then in Exodus 27, verses 1 through 8, he gives instructions for a bronze altar. What's the difference in the two altars? What is the bronze altar for? What did they use when they were in the wilderness? That four-horned altar. It says, you shall make your altar of acacia wood, 5 cubits long, 5 cubits broad. The altar shall be square. Its height shall be 3 cubits. And you shall make horns on it on all 4 corners. What were they copying? What was this altar to represent? They have another altar that's made out of precious metal. Huh? It's a different size. Okay, exactly. And then what? But they couldn't carry the ark with them for 40 years, could they? So they were given instructions. This is made out of wood. Be lighter, so they could carry it with them anywhere they were able to sacrifice as they were supposed to. But once they crossed the Jordan into Israel, there in Exodus chapter 27, he told them what kind of altar he wanted them to use, and it was different from that. So you had some people that said, well, I like that horned altar that we were using while we were in the wilderness, so I'm going to cut some stones and make one that looks like that. Okay? It's an altar. It still meets dimensions that we were given, but it's not exactly what God wanted them to have, was it? They just changed the way they built it. And when we start looking at these things, again, another lesson, it's the same thing with religion today. I know what this says, but I think we can do it this way and God will be just as happy. And we find out he's not just as happy, is he? Tel Arad was destroyed 6 times and rebuilt. Under Josiah's kingship, it was determined that they were not following the law on many things. And they found a copy of the law. Now, we've been talking about this, whether it was found here at Tel Arad or if it was in Jerusalem, but he spent some time with it. And when he found out, here he was, he's still a young man, he puts them back to following the law. He probably did as much or more than anybody for centuries to revive and get the people, God's chosen people, back to doing what God wanted them to do and following the law. I think it's important to realize that when Israel trying to put together when Israel was being attacked by Arad, evidently they were handling them pretty good because the Jews went to God and prayed they needed help. I'm trying to see where the scripture I'm looking for is. Second Kings 22. 2 Kings chapter 22. And Hilkiah the high priest said to Shaphan the secretary, I have found the book of the law in the house of the Lord. And Hilkiah gave the book to Shaphan, and he read it. And Shaphan the secretary came to the king and reported to the king, your servants have emptied out the money that was found in the house, and have delivered it into the hand of the workmen who have oversight of the house of the Lord. Then Shaphan the secretary told the king, Hilkiah the priest has given me a book. And Shaphan read it before the king. And verse 11 says, when the king, it's talking about Josiah, heard the words of the book, he tore his clothes. And this was where he started to bring back the law and to get them to doing what they were supposed to be doing to please God. They kept the Passover, and he was the last good king before exile. This is the aqueduct I was talking about a while ago. This is just out the back, down below the mound where the water came into a cistern that was low, and then the water would be carried up. Out the front, go back, you can see all of the orchards, vineyards in the background with shades over them. This is going in the front entrance. There was a tower like this on both sides. This was not a double wall fortress. Normally when they had a single wall, they would build their dwellings or homes around the perimeter where they used the wall as one wall in their one-room house, usually. And then that way, if they were in battle, they could get on top of the house and fight over the wall, have access to the top of the wall. You can see the line in here that as they uncovered this, unearthed it, this was original down here, this was added. We left Tel Arad and headed down the highway not very far, and this is a community of Bedouins. Remember, they were the nomadic people. Hadn't been too many years ago, they said that they literally survived in tents, nomadic, moved. They have started building some structures and a little more permanent, but this is where we started seeing more sheep and goats and shepherds, camels. This is just a village. Next stop is Beersheba. I don't know if you can read this, but again, an older site. This site probably goes back 3000 BC, the time of Abraham. This is where he dug his well, and also planted a tamarisk tree. When you look at the tamarisk tree, it's a type of pine, but it supposedly weeps a little moisture from the leaves. So during the daytime, it was a cool place to sit. Any kind of breeze, and then you'd have moisture coming from that tree. So it was a plus there. We don't know how many wells that Abraham dug in this area, but it was a very important area. Again, a heavily fortified area. Here's a replica of the four-horned altar that they found there. It was all made out of cut stones. So not worshiping the way they were instructed to worship. You can see this is another pronunciation or spelling of, we call it Beersheba. I think it's written as such over here on the map. Beersheba. When you look at that, trying to see exactly what. Beersheba is mentioned 33 times in the Bible. It's about 70 miles south of Jerusalem. Beer or Beer means well, which is, of course, very important in the desert. And then Shiva or Sheba is means covenant or seven. Now, we'll read here in a moment, and we'll see about where the seven comes in on this. It's the home of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Hagar and Ishmael were banished from here in Genesis chapter 21, verses 14 on through to tell that story. Sarah died and was buried 20 miles north of here at Hebron. This is where Abraham had a covenant with Abimelech. Genesis 21, verses 22 through 31. This is where they make a covenant or have an agreement over the use of this well, so nobody gets bumped, nobody gets their feelings hurt, everybody shares. And that's where the seven comes in, because Abraham had dug the well, planted the trees, but he traded 7 ewes from his flock, and that's I'm assuming that's where the number 7 comes in on Sheba or Shiva. If you remember, we talked about Elijah here a couple of 3 weeks ago, how after he had done what he had done, he ran for his life from Jezebel, and that's from I believe it was the north end of the Jezreel Valley, and he ran as hard as he could go to get away from Jezebel to Beersheba. That's in Kings chapter 19. Let's see. Let's go through some pictures here. This is a picture of the well. And this well that they call Abraham's well is just right outside the gate there. And of course, it's fixed with troughs where animals can drink, supposedly located where people in the city could use it, but also passerbys could use it. And you can see some of the storage. Normally when you see long walls there, high walls, be storage areas, and you can see here pretty readily where the original lines were on these buildings. Storage areas. See the greenery in the background. Again, going down in the bottom of a cistern. We don't know for sure, but it's very likely that Abraham dug this also, built a cistern for water storage. While we were there, there was a couple of Bedouin little shepherds, young boys. They drove their goats back and forth across this little berm back here several times, waiting on us to get out to go back towards their bus so we could watch them drive their goats around. And they came around behind us, and then they're probably wasn't an area much wider than the aisle out here in between these pews, between the stone wall on the back side of Beersheba and a pretty busy road. And those kids drove those goats between that rock wall and that road without any trouble. I'm certain that they had done that many times before, but nobody got out in the road or anything. They didn't have any problems with them at all. Okay. Our next location is Lachish. This is for me, especially after we got home and studied on it more, there was not a great deal to see there, but when we get home and study, this is a mini Masada, except it happened 770 years prior to Masada. The Assyrians attacked here in 701 BC, and they built a ramp. This is a remnants of a ramp right here to get in and get over that wall. And the Israelites, they fought here, Kent. They didn't, we talked about the murder/suicide that happened at Masada. These guys fought to the death. It may have been one reason that some of those folks made the decisions that they did at Masada, because the Assyrians, the people that they killed, they cut their heads off. When they were digging this, excavating, they uncovered 2 caves below the main entrance there, and both of those caves were full of skulls, or they just cut those people's heads off. And of course, like they did in the north, in the northern kingdom, the ones that they let live, which was probably women and children, they put rings in their lips and they led them back to Assyria. Very, very cruel people. And like I say, not near as big as the Masada area, but it's still a very important fortress, a fortified area. It's 5 levels of civilization was found here at Lachish. It's 25 miles southwest of Jerusalem. It's a Canaanite city of 3000 BC. Became an Israelite fortress in 1400 BC. The Assyrians destroyed it in 701 BC. And if you remember, this was the last conquest of the Assyrians before they went to Jerusalem. They saved Jerusalem for last. So they had conquered the north, and they had gone around and was successful in conquering everywhere they went. Had a perfect battle record until they get to Jerusalem. And we'll look at that shortly. Yeah, they did, and I've been guilty of saying it, and I've heard Marcia say it. Well, the Israelites stood up and defeated them. But no, God defeated them. God gave them, He gave them the power. And of course, what happened is God sent, He sent one angel down, and in the night, that angel killed 180,000 Assyrian soldiers that night. So now the Israelites didn't have a lot to do with that, other than they prayed to God and asked for help, and were faithful evidently in their prayer, because God did answer the prayer. And who knows if the Israelites remembered Lachish when they were preparing at Masada, but it's just very interesting that they parallel each other. Of course, this is Lachish letters just written from Lachish to Jerusalem explaining what's going on, what's about to happen. Of course, these are replicas here, but I found several of these. I think it says 20 pot shards were discovered bearing these inscriptions. The inner gate we're fixing to look at here, or what it would have looked like prior to that. And as we got inside, again, we could see the remains down low here. They even had a place of worship. I'll call it that. Probably living quarters for the commander over their armed forces here. But the Canaanites even had a place of worship here. And when the Israelites took it over in 1400, they made a latrine out of it. I mean, historically, said that they took their worship place and made a latrine out of it. You know, after Assyria was defeated at Jerusalem, and this angel of the Lord killed 180,000 soldiers, they went into a tailspin. Who came to power after them? The Babylonians. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Marsha, I'm rolling. If there's anything that I'm skipping over, I'm having to roll to get out. Countryside is beautiful around this area. You see all of the light patches here. That is vineyards with shades over them to protect the fruit from the sun. You count the chairs. There's a replicated chair for each king of the southern kingdom through here, and how we can't read a whole lot, but it'll tell you, at least tell you who, as far as Rehoboam, 911 to 928 BC, or 928 to 911 BC. You see, there's one of these out there for each one of them. 20? Give me 20. Of course, we can see what this is and see how they make the different ways they make these shades. I thought this was from Lachish looking down. Marcia thinks we were on the way to the Eli Valley. When we saw this, it really doesn't matter, but it's a good representation of what the country looks like. We're literally getting into some rolling hills here and seeing more trees. Changing from where we were way down here south of Beersheba and Tel Arad. And here we are in the Eli Valley, and of course we do not have many pictures here, but there's, you know, this valley runs east and west, a true statement, with a little dog leg in it, and it has a ridge or a little range of mountains on the north and one on the south. And the Israelites were over here on this side. And of course the Philistines were over on this other side. I don't know if I even have this picture. You can see a little more of it. But down through this valley, there was a brook or a creek that ran, and this is basically it. That this right around through here, you can see somebody in here probably picking up their 5 stones, rolling around this way, and of course this is a story that we all know, David and Goliath. You find it in 1 Samuel chapter 17, and it is a story that's good to read and catch up on. We know Goliath was at least 9 foot tall. He could have been taller than that, but we know that he was at least 9 foot tall from the inscription that was given of him, and his breastplate, his breast armor, which was layered small pieces of metal, weighed 125 pounds. So he was a big, strong man. He even had a shield bearer. He didn't have to carry his own shield. He had a man that was assigned to him to carry his shield around until he needed it. And then here's David. We don't know how old David is. He's just referred to as a youth. He was probably, I don't know how old you have to be over there or during that time to be considered to be a man, but Saul was a big man. It referred to him as being a head tall above everybody, and he gave, if you remember the story, he gave David his armor to wear, and David put it on and didn't like it because he hadn't tested it, which tells me David must have been an older youth and must have been a pretty good sized young man, strong himself, to even think about putting Saul's armor on to use that. This area here, and it may just be me, but I enjoyed it because it is totally undeveloped by Israel. They did put a little pull off where a car or even our bus, we pulled our bus off the road to get out of traffic, and then you had to walk around this way some, I don't know, 100, 150 yards, something like that, to get over to this area. But it was real quiet. It was agriculture utilized then, and it still is today. It's still just fields with crops. When we were there, it was a wheat field. Let's see. I made a note because it fits us today. This was a winner-take-all battle. You know, it wasn't. The Israelites were afraid of them. They didn't want to come down. Goliath came down and wanted to challenge the best that they had to offer, and they just really didn't have anybody that was brave enough to take on Goliath. So here comes David. He's just there to visit his brothers, and he hears Goliath down there sending these insults up to God, and he couldn't stand it. And that's why he wanted to go down and fight Goliath. And of course, we all know what happened. But to me, the big deal on this story here, David had a skill. Now we find out later on in life he had more skills, but at this time he had a skill, and it was that slingshot that he had, and he had practiced with it enough, and he'd got good enough at it, and he served God with it. Okay, and I think there's another lesson for us. You know, we don't all have the same skills. We don't all are able to do maybe what we want to do, but we all have something that we can contribute and something that we can work on, something that we can get better at, something that we can use to serve God. And you know, we need to look and make sure that we are developing a skill to better serve God. As we left, this is one of the checkpoints that we went through. Of course, you can see here, everybody, you know, here's young person over here behind the barrier with an AK-47, and then you have some out front here. We were fortunate we never even got stopped when we went through here, but all cars went through there and got stopped unless they had possibly a government type of identification. We're on our way to Jerusalem here, and we stop at an area on the side of the mountain opposite of Jerusalem and take several pictures of Jerusalem. Evidently, this is a Muslim community or village. You can see their place of worship, and then there's their tower to call for prayer, which we heard those going off pretty regular in Jerusalem. This lady and youngster, they had their whole family at this intersection. Like we see panhandlers over here, they were selling bread. Bread's very important in that country, and they were out selling bread at that intersection. Here's one of the pictures that we took of Jerusalem, and I just want you to notice, Tim, how tight everything is built. It's very crowded. From any angle you want to look at it. Not off the top of my head. We probably, Marcia may have it in her. I didn't know she had her diary with her. While she's looking for that, I'm going to go ahead, Kent. So you can see it very, very close quarters. Every direction you look. There's the Dome of the Rock there. Okay, that's where we got the Herodian. $856,000. God will use us if we develop a skill. Now, that skill may be, and of course, it needs to be us in the Word. What He wants us to do, how He wants us to do it, how we're to act, how we're to worship. We saw in all these places where they may not be off base far, but they're off base. They're going against God's will. Of course, we saw a lot of paganism in the Canaanites. But here we say, well, we can look at the youth, serve God well in our youth. I don't know about y'all, I've missed that opportunity a while back. but we are still here to serve God, and we're here to develop a skill that God can use, and He can use each and every one of us, just like He used David as a young teen. And with that, we're going to sing hymn number, is it 193? Is it?